Hello, Beth. So great to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Andres. I'm very happy to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
You've worked, of course, in Half Nelson and Drive, and you've done these huge things like Guardians, which we've talked about before, Guardians 3, and also the special, and now the what we're all waiting for, Superman. Um, Working with all these directors, tell me about how their approach influences you, their role as directors, the differences, and how they interact with you and how you interact back with them and the rest of the crew.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think directors there's a whole range of it. And I'm sure it must be the same with the way people approach production design. Some directors have really clear ideas and have exactly in their head what the sets are supposed to look like, and they want you to follow exactly their roadmap. But then also sometimes directors show up and they don't have any idea. They don't have any visual idea yet. They're maybe more focused on dialogue, on characters, and so it's really when it's that way, then I kind of get to fill in all of the blanks and really develop the visuals. So it kind of runs the gamut. I think the best approach is when they come with a general sense of what the overall tone of the film should be, and they can tell the production designer and the costume designer and their editor and one or two sentences, one or two lines, like here's what the set should feel like. Let's develop it like that. And then giving me the space to go and really dive into that, really dig into it, really, make that sing and really bring that to life. And so that's the way I kind of prefer to work. And I feel like it's the most successful way to work, because you're given a little bit of a framework to work within. And then that the director is sharing that same sense of direction with, visual effects, with their cinematographer. So we're all going to be, pretty cohesive. We're all getting the same kind of general notes. But then when the director really gives the department heads the freedom in the room to really explore and really do what they do best and really make things shine. But I every time I feel like, I know all these different director styles. I worked with the whole range. Somebody comes in out of left field and throws a curveball and you have to kind of think on your feet. But I also think it's one of the jobs of being a department head, is being able to be flexible. And I've worked with department heads in the past who just get incredibly frustrated if they don't get really clear direction, or they get frustrated if it's too specific and they can't, do their thing. But I feel like it's our job to also mold around the way a director likes to work and to be flexible. And I feel like if you kind of come with an open mind, and if you come with ideas, come ready to embrace whatever the process is that's set before you, always leads to the best result, I think.
As you know, myself, I come from visual design and also drawing comics. I started drawing comics since I was a kid. And I know that directors like Ridley Scott and Jim Cameron also actually do a lot of drawing themselves. Is that helpful, or is that too much?
I think especially when you have an eye like both of those directors. And Ridley Scott, started in set design, I believe. And so when they come with a really good sensibility already, then it's kind of perfection. Then you're really just getting to work with a master and bring his or her ideas to life. But I've also worked with directors who have come in with, here I did these drawings, or I had an artist do these, and then you look and you're like, oh, okay, we'll try our best, but like the scale is way off, and like a human is like the size of an ant compared to what that window should be. And do they understand the relationships of these spaces? And so sometimes that has definitely happened in the past as well, where you have to try to figure out how to gently explain where some discrepancies might be and what you might need to do to try to help resolve some of that. But yes, I was lucky enough. I was working at a workshop for SCAD at their Lacoste campus in Provence last summer. And it was 10 minutes down the road from Ridley Scott's winery. And so I got to go, and they have a beautiful display of all his movies, but they also have all these framed pieces of his sketches and his storyboards, his little set sketches.
Really, Grams, he calls them, yeah.
Yes. And and it was amazing, and to see
incredible,
him. Yeah. And also just to see like, oh wow, some some of the talents out there, what they could just do, what they can convey with just a piece of paper and pencil, It's really interesting, but I also feel like, and I try to approach it the same way with production design. I feel like sometimes a really firm, concrete idea is helpful and is the way to go. But I also feel like sometimes, and I only know this from experience because I think sometimes I've fallen victim to this myself, where I'll have a concrete idea that was maybe formed in a vacuum and maybe wasn't taking a whole big picture into consideration. And so I think having flexibility where you're not so concrete that it has to be X, and being open, even still, here's, if they hand you this drawing, let's do this, even still just keeping 10-20% open for some evolution and adaptation, and is still I think a good thing. I really try to do the same as a designer with everybody I work with art directors, set decorators, concept artists. It's everybody got into this industry to be creative and to bring what they could, to a frame. And so let everybody have the room and respect everybody's talents enough, and let them have the room to do that.
Yeah, and I love that your job, it's kind of a bridge also between the fancy of the director and the aspirations of so many artists, but you know how to make it practical, and bridging it to the engineers who will then build the stuff, and then making that possible is such a huge feat, especially when we're talking about this incredible world, right?
Yeah, and there's always limitations. And I think that's one of the things that, we end up learning about. Like Judiana Makovsky in costumes will know, like, if you make the angle like this in a shoulder, they're not going to be able to raise their arms. And I'll know if you go this high on a set, you're not going to be able to build it because you're going to hit, the perms of a stage. And so these are all these little things that start to just become innate knowledge for us.
Mm-hmm.
Doing this long enough, that I think, just trusting that that's what your department heads will be able to bring, and knowing that, like, okay, there's going to be years and years of experience and years of set design, and, to back up some of the decisions that you'd end up making.
And you're artists with so much to bring to the table that it would be a shame not to do it. I feel the same way, like with actors. If you do a line reading, as a director, give them a line reading or do too much for them, you're depriving yourself of everything they have to bring, and wonderful surprises. And it's a collaboration. Speaking of collaborating, one of the particular roles, because I want to go through a few of them, but I was wondering, because as you know, in some of our panels, I bring friends from Marvel and from the different studios, and not just production design, but concept art. And I wanted to know how you work with concept designers, because they also sometimes talk to the director very early on. And how does it work, that relationship in your case?
In the cases that I've had in the past, the concept artist will start typically after I've been on for a couple weeks and I've gotten my feet wet, and I know the general idea of what a movie will be. I always, as soon as I read a script, the first thing I do is just loads and loads of research, and then I put it together into a lookbook that just kind of helps me to organize my thoughts and the design, kind of the overall tone of the movie, the colors, the shapes, some big distinctions of some of the key sets. So I'll have that, and then around that point is when the concept artist would start. And so I can give them that book so they can see, okay, here's maybe the concept artist is just working on one small set within that movie, but I want him or her to know, here's the whole world that you're going to be fitting within. So it's a good thing for everybody to know. And then I'll have a whole host of references for that concept artist to work from, for whatever the set is that they'll be doing. And generally I try to do a sketch or a quick floor plan, and give that to them to kind of take and run with. And I know some designers with really amazing technical skills will go deep into 3D modeling all the spaces and have it all figured out. And then, the concept artists bring that to life. And that's amazing. I really respect those skill sets. I definitely prefer to leave a bit more room for the concept artists to explore on their own, and to let them put things into a model and to shape it, with some rough parameters for me. But let them kind of, again, just like I was saying with the way directors can work with designers, like I like to let concept artists have the space to kind of explore their own things. And like you said, happy accidents, they'll come up with something, or even see something in a reference image that I overlooked that they'll kind of dig in and pull out and pop into an image. I feel like concept art is such a beautiful part of what our department does and what these artists create. That giving them as much space as they can to be creative is really important to me. And I've also had sometimes there's always, every movie, there's like one or two sets or one or two worlds that you just can't crack, or you think you figured it out and the director wants something else, or the studio says, oh, it's too similar to something else we've done, and you keep going back to the drawing board. Definitely had moments like that where you spent 4 months trying to figure out what this one thing should be. And I had a great art director, Alan Hook, teach me this great technique, this great little device, which is go in, have all your concept artists do pencils down on whatever they're working on, and say, here's the 2-line brief on what this thing is. You give us ideas. Like, what are, you just go nuts. And sitting back and seeing, give everybody a couple of days, and then you start to see all of these ideas come in. And that's really interesting, because then you just get to see somebody else's just wildly different, totally unabridged interpretation of something. And inevitably something's unlocked, or you see at least pieces and different images that you put together to help solve that problem. But I respect that medium greatly, concept art, and it's one of the most fun parts of the process for me with production design.
Working with your own department, as a head of the department, specifically with set designers or costume designers and in construction, are there things that have like a specific cases of happy surprises that you've seen, or just memorable collaborations in one of these projects that we can talk about?
Yes. When I'm allowed to talk about Superman, I have a great example on Superman that I'll give you.
Okay, we'll do that.
But on Guardians of the Galaxy, we were building the alien city of nowhere, and a lot of the art department took a trip down to Disney World in Florida, and ended up coming across all the great Star Wars references and sci-fi references they had there as part of their themed experience. And they all came back after that weekend with hundreds of photos of all of these textures and shapes and ages and finishes and color combinations. And we ended up just spreading it all out, putting it all out on a table, and kind of, pulling the things out that felt best and that kind of caught our eye most. And it was just one of those little things of like, I didn't join them. I was traveling that weekend. I couldn't join them, but 10 art department members came back with all of these great ideas and references just from having gone to Disney World, and
that's so much fun.
Yeah. And I think had they been working within an art department where, a lot of free thought and suggestions weren't as welcomed, they probably wouldn't have done that or wouldn't have made that leap. And so I remember thinking like, oh, this is a really good example of like, you let people know that you're going to be really respectful of what they want to bring to the table, and that you genuinely want their ideas. They'll be on the lookout everywhere, and they'll come in and offer ideas without hesitation. And, so yeah, and then we're working with set decorators too. Earlier in my career, when you're not building as much, you end up like set decorating is kind of the main part of the job when you're doing $1 million movie, and you're not, maybe you can paint a wall, but for the most part you're changing out the furniture and the location. And so I used to be really, really, really hands-on on that, and really have really specific ideas and detailed ideas. And I did a lot of the shopping myself, and then I did a lot of the dressing myself. And as the movies got bigger and you start building so much more, you have less bandwidth, obviously, to do as much of the set deck as I used to. But then I've been so lucky to work with some of these just outstanding set decorators. Rosemary Brandenburg, whom I've worked with for the last 3 films. She's a legend. She's been doing this forever. And man, she just has this brilliant eye. And we've had some sets where, aside from some references, a couple of references and a couple of keywords, I'll just let her go to town with her own research and go to town with her own little fabrication shops. And she'll come in and show me, these are these things we put together for this, crazy science lab. And it's, and I'm always just amazed by just creativity that can come from that department when you just let them have a lot of ownership of a set.
I think one of the great things about that is that when you come back to a project with a team that you've sort of shaped and that's working at full tilt, is that you develop that trust, right? And then it's like a shorthand, and it's great, and you're empowering as a leader that you are of your department. Is such a huge part, right? Empowering them, and so having them have that freedom is probably where great ideas can come, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just makes a better product at the end of it for everybody, So, and a better experience too for everybody.
Of course, there is a different type of relationship because he is also, or she, or they are also the head of a department, the cinematographer. And I was very curious about your different experiences across many different genres of films that you've done with a cinematographer.
One of the first cinematographers I worked with had this beautiful line. I'd done this 360 set. It was a small movie, so it was just mostly painting and set dressing. And I remember I just been looking at it in my crappy house lights, the whole time that I was working on it. And then he came in and he spent all this time, figuring out all these little spotlights, getting the practicals to glow and figuring out their color temperatures. And it was one of my first times working with a sophisticated, like an accomplished, experienced, sophisticated DP. And I remember I came in the next morning and I was just like, oh my goodness. This to life. And I remember he said, your job is to build the jewel. My job is to make the jewel shine. And I was like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful way of putting it. So I really see the relationship like that. Like I and the art department and I can come up with, some ideas of what we feel like what lighting will bring our sets to life best, and what kind of color temperatures and we can give some of those thoughts and share some of those thoughts with cinematographers. And my best relationships and best working experiences with cinematographers are when they're open to those ideas. They want to sit and really look at that stuff weeks out, months out with me and really shape it, and then really take the time, go in and look at it well ahead of time. Invite me and my team to be a part of the process. And then I feel like you watch it grow and you watch it evolve over those last few days before something is shot. And that to me is always one of the best ways of working between art department and cinematography, when they're very much in conversation and including each other in the process. So I'm always amazed how much a fantastic cinematographer can just make even a set that's decidedly dull for one reason or another. Maybe the script called for it to be a really simple, minimal, dull space. And even the best cinematographers can still make even those spaces really beautiful in their minimalism if they can just treat the lighting just so. And I'm really fortunate. I've worked with a number of cinematographers who've really elevated the work that I'd already laid out for them to put the camera on. So.
It makes sense because color really exists in our minds as a combination of light on the surfaces, creating. So I can only imagine how chaotic it would be if you two were not in sync and somebody lit in a set,
Yes.
completely different way, right?
Yeah, no, it really, and then you walk in and then sometimes, and it can become tricky, especially if that person has really strong ideas of what they think the lighting should be. And if I've, different ideas. And what's also tricky is that, production designers and art departments live with these sets for 4, 5, 6 months sometimes. It's in our heads. We've been working on it. We've been drawing it for months and months and months. And a lot of times the cinematographer and the lighting team come in and really start looking at those sets in those final weeks. And a lot of times even in just those final days. And sometimes in a crunch, they're just seeing it for the first time the day before it shoots. And so it's really, that's where the power dynamic can be really tricky because, we want to be respectful of cinematographers' choices with lighting. It's technically under their domain. And, but at the same time, I feel like we end up having such a familiarity and such an intimacy with these spaces that we spent so much time working on that I'm always really appreciative when cinematographers want me to be a part of that process and want my team to be a part of that process and invite me in for camera tests and want to test out lighting well ahead of time. And so it's always fun. I've also been in a pickle before where the finishes on that just did not work, and I to the DP and said can you figure out how to make that a little bit dimmer, put a little warmer light on, which makes it glow a little bit. And so sometimes they can really save you in a pinch.
What I was thinking though, from what you were saying, is how painful it must be. Because for us directors, every department, but if you guys work so long on a set, for example, and then that scene gets cut,
Oh yeah.
Do you have an experience maybe in some of the movies in the past where?
Yeah. No, and, there's just been a number of times. There's just been a number of times. It probably very interestingly, only because James Gunn is so decisive in what he shoots and what he's going to edit and cut. He knows it so well ahead of time that I don't know if I've ever had any of my sets from his films cut, because he wastes no time shooting things that won't end up in the movie. But before that, yeah, there had been full on bar sets that I built for a romantic comedy that we spent a week shooting in, and then just went by the wayside, and and full sets that we've gone in and like dressed a house top to bottom, relocated the homeowners, and then go to the movie and you're like, where'd that house go? It's like, all that work. So yeah, and sometimes, especially in the smaller movies, it's really interesting. It's I always felt like the things that it was a flashback, and so that means you put so much time and effort into that one 1970s period piece set that you had to do, and maybe it was a big outdoor shopping area or a street or something like that. You do all that, and then often flashbacks do get cut from movies or really minimized because when you're just trying to save time in a film, normally those are things that can be minimized. You're like, wait a minute, wait a minute. Doing that whole, exterior, that whole exterior. But that's the part of the process. It's important not to get too precious about. It's important to care, but it's important to not get too precious about things where those things happen.
Yeah, well, and one of the important reasons to always storyboard for us, the directors, to try to minimize. But I know that even in projects where they storyboard a lot, in the end, something might get cut.
Yeah, so end up with a 3-hour movie, and you need to do something about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to clarify for people who may mistakenly think that nowadays everything is just built in the computer, and I wanted to go into that relationship which you're very adept at, which is the relationship between production design and VFX and just the digital component of your designs also, because they are part of your designs many times that they work on and build on.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. Even though VFX is such an integral part of filmmaking, and it's become one of the top 3 or 4 roles for a film that's being made, it's still relatively the newcomer. Like costume designers, cinematographers, editors, production designers, music. We've all been there for decades and decades and decades. And but VFX has only been a couple decades, so they actually are the relative newcomers, even though they're so important. Early on, I think there's an interesting thing where I think some production designers saw it almost as it's this invasion of what I do, and so therefore I'm going to reject it. I'm going to have nothing to do with that thing that happens in post when I'm long gone and on another movie. And there's story after story that I heard coming up of super experienced production designers just folding their arms and checking out as soon as like the production meeting turned to visual effects, and just nope, I only do real scenery. So if that's made in a computer, I want nothing to do with it. So that was, I think, one of the earlier approaches to it. And it's really, really interesting, because then what you've seen is that visual effects have a lot of say and a lot of their hands wrapped around what the final result is in a film, because they're the last ones. That's the last department to touch something before it goes up in front of an audience. And so I think as it's no longer just extending the sky and seeing more of the horizon or something, and as it started to become actually filling out this world, anything above 20 feet, they're going to fill out, and a lot of architecture that needs to be figured out, and a lot of there's a lot of big strokes that still need to be figured out. If visual effects isn't given some kind of a roadmap from the art department, as I think often they weren't in the beginning, they're going to have to do it on their own. And then the decisions, so you almost, as a production designer, as an art department, you kind of relinquish all say if you don't really try to make sure you're very involved in that process. And so for me, I've been so lucky to work with some really wonderful visual effects supervisors, Stephane Soretti from James Gunn's films, Mark Russell from New York, just incredibly collaborative, where they, like I, really see it as a partnership first and foremost. We're in this together. I'll let the visual effects supervisors know, like, hey, you guys are just getting started. I've been designing now. I've been on for a couple weeks or a couple months. I just want to show you everything I've been working on. And moving ahead, I want you guys to be in the meetings when I'm sharing stuff with the director, when I'm, going through stuff with my team. So just so that they can see it, they have familiarity, they know how things are shaping up, and they're a part of the process. And somebody like those guys, they'll just have great creative suggestions, because they're also thinking about what they're going to see sitting in an editing room a year from now, and the holes that they're going to find. And they might have a suggestion for, like, hey, what if something comes around this corner? Or, hey, what if this extends and then you see such and such above? And so I think staying really open to their suggestions, and again, like, having them be part of our creative process is really important. But then on the flip side, what that's led to is then they've invited me to be a part of their part of the creative process, which is sitting in all those kickoff meetings when the visual effects houses are getting their first rundowns of what sets they're going to work on, Frame Store, ILM, Weta, sitting there where I can actually show them references and talk through with them and talk through concept art with them, so that they're not hearing it through, 3 or 4, degrees removal from me. They're actually hearing it from me. And then just being a part of the meetings as they're showing updates to the visual effects department, just seeing how things are developing along the way. And so anyway, I think the more that the relationship between production design and visual effects is approached as a partnership, just the better, again, the result will be in the end. And I think it's really interesting. It could either be a territorial war, or it could just be, hey, let's all come at this together and join hands and make this great. And it's I'm a big believer in the latter. Sorry, that was a long-winded question, but I have a lot of strong feelings about that.
No, that's great. And to complement that great answer, I mean, by now you're such an expert on this, but I know, people looking up to you, and sometimes they may feel intimidated by the scope of these projects. Is there anything that you would tell your younger self, or just the when you first made that shift into, these tentpole movies with such a huge scope?
Yeah, just don't be afraid to ask questions. It's as simple as that. When I went from doing much smaller indies, just 10 years ago, to doing these much bigger tentpole movies, I never imagined that I was going to be lucky enough to have those doors open for me and to find myself on these enormous sets and giant productions. I also, at that point, I knew that there was so much that was unknown and that I was going to have to learn along the way. And you can either be really intimidated by that and then, make yourself smaller and not kind of step into that process with confidence. Or you can, rather than being afraid of the things you don't know, you can just find some really, really wonderful curiosity about it and make it a big learning experience. And let the folks know whom you're working with, like, hey, this is going to be a little bit new to me, so I'm going to ask questions along the way. I hope that's all right. And I hope we can just, again, become partners in this. And I've approached everything new in my career that way, and every single time it's always been received with just graciousness and generosity. And I think in general, people are really excited to share, bits and pieces of what they do, and to help educate people who are genuinely interested in learning. And so that's how I approached it when I got started in this giant world. I even before I started on the first iteration of Guardians back in 2018. I made all these appointments. I reached out to every visual effects supervisor and producer and consultant I knew and asked them for coffee dates and lunch dates, so I could just take them out and ask them all these questions about the process and what they felt could be the most helpful, approach from production design and art department, and what do they expect? What do they wish they had that they never get? What could make the process better in their eyes? And one after another, they all just shared so much. And so I came into the experience more educated, just because I had been excited enough to go out and ask all those questions and take notes and be humble. And it's okay if you don't know everything. None of us do, So.
That's great. Yeah. Great advice. Now I would like to touch upon You, Beth Mickle, production designer, your own philosophy. How do you see your process as a storyteller helping shape how the audience perceives characters through your production design?
Oh, great question. Meaning like kind of decisions that we make design wise or
Yeah,
like,
yeah. If
yeah.
you go through a script and you say, "Oh, I see this character this way, his room would be this way," and everything that
Yeah.
goes along with that. Yeah.
Well, that goes down to, I mean, there's just amazing, first amazing research you can end up doing on what the characters, who the characters are. One of my best girlfriends is designer Imbal Weinberg, and she just did the Pedro Moldovar movie, The Room Next Door. And, uh,
Nice.
and yeah, and one of the characters, one of the main characters, is a journalist, and she went out and she sought every journalist, wartime journalist she could find, female wartime journalist she could find, and asked to go into their homes and asked to take photos of things within their homes. And she brought Pedro, the director, around to all these homes just so she could come away knowing that what she was going to make was an authentic space for those characters and help to tell those stories. And it's all top of mind. I was just at this wonderful screening of hers last week, and she did a Q&A afterwards and talked about doing that. And that's, I think, a great example of what we get to do as production designers. We get to show somebody goes to work, but what their home life might be could be very different from what they present or what they portray at work, and so it's like, what is that home life? What is the world that they're coming home to? Is it lonely and empty and quiet and small, or is it big and colorful and and vibrant? And I remember I was working with I had a wonderful PA on a movie I was doing. This must have been 10 years ago. And she was really quiet, very sweet, very, very quiet, always wore really kind of neutral colors, a little reserved. And we had to go to her apartment and pick something up. And I remember we went in, parked outside, ran upstairs, went into her Brooklyn apartment, and inside it was an explosion of patterns and colors, and everything was coordinated and everything was bright primary colors. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I just had no idea that this is, and she's like, yeah, it makes me happy. I start my day better, and I'm happy when I come home because I'm surrounded by all this. And it's just something I just never would have expected. But, anyway, I think that's what we get to do with our role is figure out, what is the emotion that we're trying to tell for of these characters, but also too, what's the emotion of a scene? Is it supposed to be, I was just working on or consulting on a movie where there's a really, really tense lead up from an elevator of a hotel up to a hotel, and just thought, okay, what can we do here to make it more intense? And so we lengthened, just as something simple as like lengthening the hallway so that you could really kind of feel those long steps going up to the door. And anyway, just things like that you can do just to help try to stretch out whatever the audience is supposed to be feeling in that moment.
That's a great idea. And that goes along with something I wanted to ask. Characters have those arcs, right? So even though the sets, some of the sets are supposed to be the same sets, but are there things like that you can do to influence people's perception of the character? I know, for example, with cinematography, it's easy with the acting and there are so many things that can go on, but as a production designer, have you seen those chances too?
Yeah, yes. Definitely, like if a character is feeling a lot of pressure, if they're feeling trapped, just a really easy example is give them a really small space, give them a windowless space, and just stuff that really kind of confines them and tightens them up, and drop that ceiling down lower, and things you can do like that just subliminally makes the audience feel one way or another, and then again, exact opposite if they're kind of, big carefree happy moments, happy life, you can just kind of let everything be colorful, like extend that ceiling up, like give no confinements. And I think all that stuff, even if it's just very subliminal, it still reads, in a film. So it's really fun. It's, I started as a painter. I was a painter back in elementary school and high school and college, and that's what I did. And I just love creating these 2D images. And I just always think of what we do as like painting in 3D, you're painting in 3D. It's one big 3D, three-dimensional plane that you're getting to paint in and play with. So
Did you ever talk to your brother and say, remember when we were doing that and look at us now?
Yes. I do. Yes, I do. I'm so proud of him. And he just did this Netflix series called Sweet Tooth. And it was he and I very just and it's just a great show. And he developed the whole thing, wrote it, directed, produced it, just really built the whole thing from the ground up. And it's really fun. You can see in that all these influences of things that we just loved growing up. We loved Dark Crystal and Labyrinth and Never Ending Story. And so anyway, it has all those little trickles of that kind of stuff. And it's really neat to look and be like, look at that. This is the kind of stuff, I think when we spoke, I talked about Indiana Jones and how I was so excited about that. The gold goblet at the end of, The Last Crusade. And I just remember that little gold goblet she drinks from, for a Holy Grail. And that's just stayed with me. Like, that was this tactile thing that somebody imagined up and dreamed up. And then that ended up in a movie and that told a story. And so anyway, it's really fun that he and I are both working in the arena where we get to do that.
I remember. Yeah, I was talking with a friend also from DC, Tom King, who's part of our panels. He wrote Lanterns. One of his comics is going to be the basis of Supergirl, and but we were just talking about all the stuff that it's incredible that we find ourselves in this world when we were those geeks reading those comics, and to suddenly it's an incredible leap, but it's fascinating. It's because it's the same passion, ever burning passion that drove us here in a way, but also it's always been there.
Yeah,
and speaking of that,
better. There's kind of just nothing better.
There's nothing better. It's a privilege. Speaking of that, I remember, of course, your love for Indiana Jones, also Princess Bride, and very seminal movies for so many of us. But also, do you have a first memory of Superman? I don't know if it's the 78 movie or...
Yes, I remember my dad. I remember telling me this really sweet thing when I was little, and something had happened, and we were saying, "Oh, we wish we could just turn back time and go back and do that thing we didn't do, or fix that thing." And I remember before I'd seen the first Superman, or any Superman, I remember my dad said, "There's this movie where there's a superhero who needs to go back in time, and then he can fly, and so he flies around the world backwards, and he goes back in time." And I remember my little head just exploded. And then we watched the movie not long after that, and I was like, "Oh, that's a scene that Dad talked about." And there he was, flying and turning back time. And so that I really, really remember. I also really remember the early relationship with Margot Kidder, and I loved their dynamic. I thought that was I thought she was this really fun, spunky character spunky female character, which wasn't all that common at the time. And I just remember thinking, just loving their dynamic. So yeah, I do have that, and it's. Man, had you told me, decades ago that when I was watching those that I'd be lucky enough to work on Superman, I wouldn't have believed it.
It's gonna feel amazing. I remember working out of that movie. They would play it back in Colombia many years later, and I remember working out in that movie like so many kids flying on the streets like this after watching it. Like, it blew this fuse of imagination into so many of us, and going home and putting the pajamas, like blue pajamas, and a a red underwear on top, and a flag that I found here as a kid. So it is such a huge thing because James and the writers and stuff really made Guardians into what it is, because in the comics it wasn't so well known. But for something like Superman, how does it feel to you knowing that there's so many of us rooting for you to do? It's such a huge thing for so many of us,
Oh, it's exhilarating. I mean, it's the most exhilarating project and time of my career, really. And to know that I think that there are a lot of people rooting for us and really wanting to see a movie that they're going to just be excited about and want to go back and rewatch. And so it feels really great as we're getting close to the release here, and just knowing that the trailer had done so well and that people were so excited with what they saw there. It gives me great hope for a lot of matched excitement in July.
Yeah, I loved it, and everything I've seen, I've loved. And of course, later on, when when the movie's released, we'll get in depth to talk about the secrets behind it. Right now, I was just thinking, just to touch upon it, just on what already came, what we've seen through the trailer. We saw a little bit of those sets. We saw Luthor Corp a little bit from outside. We saw the Kent farm, which has a very specific look that's very different from what we've seen in other movies, and I love what you did there. We saw a little bit of the Fortress of Solitude, a tiny little glimpse of the Fortress of Solitude, and of course the Daily Planet. I think we had a decent view of the inside of the Daily Planet and the outside, the Art Deco. So what can you tell us about those sets?
I'm really not able to talk about them yet, but what I can say, and just everything you rattled off there was really exciting to hear. Because I think unlike a lot of big tentpole movies that people are used to now, I think people have come to really expect a lot of fully VFX sets and not as much built scenery. And James Gunn, just as he has with the other movies we've done and Guardians and Suicide Squad, he really loves real scenery. And just to say that's one of the exciting things here. I think that audience will see there's a lot of real physical scenery, real locations. It's going to be an exciting thing for people to see, I think.
I would just say, without getting into anything beyond the trailer, that it seems like it's such a great combination between things that feel earnest, like the Clark character, very homey, in a way that we feel that dichotomy very clearly with the fantastical, because we were seeing things that are from Superman Silver Age, that are on the other end of the spectrum, and having that balance, striking that balance is a thing of wonder. So I'm very excited about your work and James's works, and the whole cast and crew, of course, rooting for you, definitely.
Oh, well, thank you so much. No, I really appreciate it. And I'm anxiously awaiting the release. It's going to be really fun.
So now we're going to bring it back to the real world, because I know we both feel that, and I keep going on about this, that the importance of storytelling is that we get to put people into somebody else's shoes, feel for the other. And I know you're a very compassionate person. I remember ever since I first met you, I remember your positivity. And I was wondering, in days like these, under this administration, we're seeing a lot of communities suffering, targeted, attacked. And I wanted to ask your opinion, just because I know you're such a positive, optimist person, and that translates a lot, and that has a lot of value, I feel. What would you say to people who are feeling down right now? How do we build that positivity back up?
Oh, I appreciate that question. It's definitely a tricky time. There's no question about that. Right after the election, I listened to Dan Harris, who has this amazing podcast and book called 10% Happier. And a friend just forwarded it to me. I hadn't heard of him before that. And he just had some tips for what we can do in the aftermath of the election results, of the world changing, of all the things that we've been seeing now in the last 3 months. And I've really held on to some of that. And one of the things I think I try to keep in mind is don't worry alone. Don't feel isolated. It's therapeutic to share your concerns and to hear other people, share them and repeat them back to you. And just even if just sitting in a living room with a friend or a loved one and sharing concerns and being able to get those things out there, even if you're not going to be able to solve all the world's problems, I think it's really important to just know that you're not alone. Dan Harris wonderfully calls it like just getting in the lifeboat. Everybody gets in the lifeboat together. So that's very big. I also think, and he talks about this a little bit too, trying to look at history as a whole, even though we're in a dark period at the moment, I believe, and I think a lot of us believe, look back 50 years ago, look back 100 years ago, look back 200 years ago, and compared to now. And I think even with some of these steps back that we've taken, I would still choose to live in contemporary times versus what things looked like 100 years ago. And as far as the strides that we have made and that have been lasting. So I think try to keep that in mind, just as like a big eagle-eyed perspective. I think there's always a sense of, at least I feel like I see 2 steps forward, 1 step back, so maybe we are in our step back now, but hopefully it'll be followed by 2 steps forward, and just try to keep all that in mind. And and hope that, you know, we can just hold on and try to look out for each other, that we'll find ourselves in better place before long. And then on a kind of a silly note, but I think that this is just really important to talk about, as far as like some physical things you can do, like what can you do this morning? What can you do tonight to try to like just help yourself feel better? And anybody who knows me or who's worked with me knows this. I am a big believer in finding your wellness practice, whatever it might be. It's different for everybody. But I religiously get out and take walks, often without any music, any AirPods or anything. Just go and just have a good head clearing walk. Just get your legs moving, get your heart moving, get out, get some fresh air, clear your head. No matter how despairing I could be feeling, as soon as I get back from a walk, no matter what, 19 times out of 20, I always feel better. So like getting out, getting some movement, in the mornings, you know, trying to just have some meditative quiet time, whatever it is that your head and heart need. So I always try to sit and just have some quiet time, and just to kind of get the day started. So you're not just going through a doom scroll of all the awful things that's going to happen. It's, you know, I think it's really important to just have some quiet time and get your day started with a calmer heart. So just little things, but it's I mean, I'm sure like most of us, I've really been working on those practices the last trying to, you know, but I think it's, you know, it's one of the things I love. And actually one of the things I did right after the election was, we have this art department team. We've all been together for a number of years now. It's about 15 or 20 of us. And I just sent a note after seeing the Dan Harris thing, don't worry alone. Don't worry alone. I just sent a big group text out to everybody and just said like, hey, just thinking of you all. And we're all in this together, and we all have each other's backs, and we're here if anybody needs to talk. And it was just, and everybody just chimed in, and there was just a nice kind of long run of all of us just kind of keeping in touch and checking in with each other and sending little positive updates. And so I think that's just really important. Yeah.
Extremely valuable advice. You know, there's something we say in activism all the time, that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And sometimes it's really tough to get back up, and that's understandable. And people should gather some strength to get back into the fight. And whenever that is for each person, but it's very important to get back and keep going, because that's how we make progress. Just keep getting up and keep moving.
Yeah, exactly.
Being in community. Yeah. And there's also a lot of things that we can do. I mean, a lot of groups, and of course our panel is about specifically diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I know that you're very big on equity. That's one of the things that I admire so much about you from the moment we met and we talked the first time, and why we're talking right now. I know what you've done as far as equity when it comes to your art departments. So if you wanted to tell us a little bit about that and why you feel it's especially important today to have that equity.
Absolutely. Well, first, I think we're in the business of, you know, storytelling and exploring imagination. And I think for the longest time, since the beginning of film, it's been told mostly through one lens, through one perspective. And I think what you end up doing is you limit the storytelling that you can really give justice to. And a lot of times the characters might not be as authentic. And I think that when you let a lot of people in on that process, when you start being open to viewpoints that are coming from all directions, from, you know, having more women behind the camera, having more diversity behind the camera, you end up getting just a nice, good, rich, layered, textured, you know, set of viewpoints that all go into making this one film or these many films. And, you know, I think when you look at, personally, for me, one of the things is looking at women and how they were portrayed in film for almost the entire history of film. They had pretty much always been the love interest or an object of sexual desire, and you know, women's goals in pretty much every movie that I watched growing up. It was to become the wife of a man and the mother to children, and hopes and dreams beyond that were not really represented in film. And it's really interesting. I think when you look now and you see, like last year alone was amazing, man. You had, you know, The Substance, and you had Love Lies Bleeding, and you had Baby Girl, and you had these women behind the cameras bringing these stories of, explosive, amazing, thrilling stories with nuanced, complicated characters. And it wasn't about who's going to get the guy and will I get married before I'm 30 and have babies. It was so much more than that. And it just showed that women are so much more than that and have so much to offer. And I think that's what happens when you just open the door and have a lot of voices contribute to this one beautiful media of film. As far as diversity, you get beautiful movies like Minari and Moonlight, and so I'm so excited to see that. I'm so excited to see that happening now. And man, the last 5 years, there's just been incredible progress, and that's been really exciting to see. But then also, I feel like that extends to within the departments. Like I want to have everybody's viewpoint weighing in on, and lots of perspectives weighing in on what things could look like and could feel like. And just the same, you get more nuanced, just like you do with the stories that you're telling. You get more nuanced, more layered, more textured, more interesting, more authentic spaces and worlds that we end up creating. But then on top of that, I think even above all of that, a workplace just thrives better when it prioritizes inclusivity and acceptance and respect and kindness. And that's where creativity can really find fertile ground and can really prosper. And I think to shut out entire groups from that experience, whether, purposeful or not, women weren't production designing these movies of this size 10 years ago. It just wasn't a possibility, and then to start opening up that door and to start, now I really prioritize a lot of equity across the department. And so we had half of the staff on Superman and half the staff on Guardians of the Galaxy were positions filled by women. And so you just had this beautiful balance in the department where everybody was respectful and decent and good humored and accepted, and nobody felt like they were the small voice in the room. So I just think it just makes for a better work environment, which also, better, happier time for everybody, more fruitful, more successful product at the end. It's like, what's not to love with that?
Very true. Very true. And, very inspiring to hear you say that. Just on my end, as a man, we always I feel like we have to check ourselves that we're not taking up space, or that whenever we speak, are we considering that we're also offering the spotlight and the platform to voices. And I understand it from my racial background, how important it is to hear those voices, just so that we get a better picture of what the world actually is like. Yeah. That's all we want. And one of the reasons I've always loved this country and why it seems so inspiring and why I think it's so successful is because of that diversity. So to deny it feels like shortchanging ourselves. Why would we do that? That's just not the way to go about things.
Yes, exactly. Yep, exactly. Why would you start with, already one foot amputated? Why would you not want to have both feet, below you as you start that run,
Exactly. So thank you so much. We could go on forever, and we'll keep the conversation going later for sure.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, it was a joy to talk to you, and I appreciate your questions. Are always just they clearly come from a filmmaker. They're always much deeper and much more intuitive about the film process. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I know I really appreciate you not only as an artist but as a person. So I thank you for sharing all of this with us.